welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is Mr. John Cameron, my favorite author, and he should be yours. John, there's a lot of turmoil in the last couple weeks here across the world, but we're going to look here over into Europe. And, you know, J.D. Vance mentioned something, a couple months ago in his trip to Europe about how Europe needs to start taking care of themselves, standing on their own. Mm-hmm. And so Europe now has to make a decision on how much they're willing to spend on defending themselves. They're so worried about the instability in Eastern Europe, on their eastern borders, but yet historically they have not been willing to pay the price.
They're worried, but only worried to the extent that we spend the money to protect them. Yeah, they weren't worried enough to protect themselves.
And you know, for a long time, John, the 70s and 80s, you could kind of make a sense. We didn't want Germany to rearm, correct? That was kind of the justification for us spending so much money.
Probably still don't want them to rearm, but you know they are. So
yeah, and so, but did that make Europe lazy, in a sense? Complacent, maybe, is a better term.
Well, Europe's lazy and complacent anyway. I mean, people retire at like 55. They've got a 35-hour work week. There's no entrepreneurship. They got cradle-to-grave care to a level that we don't have, you know. And if you can't, like in the UK, 1 out of 7 young people aren't working, aren't disabled, and aren't even looking for work.
Yeah,
so
that's the trouble. And it's one thing to have 1 out of 7 unable to find work, unable to get work because of economic difficulties. But when you have that many young people, we're not talking broken down 50, 60-year-olds who...
Hey,
hey,
those are young people.
Hey, I said I'm the 50-year-old here, John. But they're not like us, who've kind of broken down. These are young people. And when I was 25, 30, I was working 3 jobs and trying to make the budget mix for the family.
I was working and going to school or working jobs that required 50, 60 hours a week. Typically only worked 1, but you know, working and going to school, I think I had, 2 weeks off of both at the same time in 5 years or something like that. So yeah.
You're supposed to do that when you're young. You're supposed to go off and gather your
nose to the grindstone.
Gather your skills, build something. So when you're 40 years old, 50 years old, you don't have to work that hard anymore. You get to use your brain instead of your brawn.
You know, unless you're somebody like Musk or the other billionaires, where you do 70-hour weeks until you die at age 70.
Because they don't know how to live any different. There's just people like that.
And it's fun to them. It's a game. You know.
But I'm going to go back. Did our military presence allow this? You know, us being parked in Europe for 50 years has allowed them to pass off the defense of Europe, the costs of that defense, to the United States taxpayer.
Yeah, and tax.
And so they got to spend all their social welfare programs, their universal health care that's not quite as universal as we think it is,
or nearly as good.
That's not quite as good as we think it is. But they pay for all that on the backs of American taxpayers paying for the defense.
Yes.
And we've got some numbers that actually can kind of back that up here, John. Poland is currently spending 4.12% of their GDP on defense.
Poland is. They're spending the most because Poland is flat and people invade each other right across Poland.
Yeah,
so
Poland has a long history of
they
invaded.
learned that lesson. They know they can't depend on Germany to do what it says, Russia to do what it says. They've you know, all of the death camps, many of them were in Poland. They've learned that lesson.
Yeah, and let's go down this list real quick, because Estonia is at 3.4% of their GDP. The U.S. is at 3.38. We spend a lot of money on defense, but we're only spending 3.38. Only. Air quotes there.
Yeah.
And
we could spend.
Trump wanted the 5% target. I think
Say what?
Trump wanted them to spend 5%.
Wanted them to spend.
Yeah, I think our foreign, somebody at the UN or whatever the guy I forget the guy's name, he wanted them to spend 4. But, you know, we're at 3.38. The UK is at 2.3. France is at 2.06. Germany's less than 2. Italy's at 1.49. Canada's at 1.37. Belgium's 1.3. And Spain's 1.28. Now, Spain, way down there at the end, kind of, we get to live off the fact that they're far away from all the problems.
They just have to worry about lots of people coming over from North Africa, but that's not a military issue.
That's
Yeah.
that's a different
Yeah.
issue. But we have for 70 years the American taxpayer has kept Europe relatively peaceful. And at some point that has to end. We're $36 trillion in debt, regardless of what your views on Ukraine are and whether we should, how much or whether we should at all help. There comes a point where we simply cannot afford to do it anymore. We cannot afford to take money from the poor single mother who's working at McDonald's to pay bills, take even $1 from her to send overseas. It's unconscionable.
Yes, and that the money we spend, I'm willing to bet we could spend half the money we spend on quote-unquote defense and get better bang for our buck. Our procurement, I mean, the Department of Defense hasn't ever passed an audit. Neither has most of the government. The contracts are full of, I'm sure if they could ever drill all the way down, fraud. And they're padded, and these weapons programs that are basically just really expensive toys, many of them don't work. And so I'm firmly convinced that we could have a better Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard and spend half the money we spend now.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to stick in Europe. Germany did something last week that many people never thought was going to happen. Germany removed its debt brake. Germany decided that they were going to allow themselves to borrow more money than their constitution allows. And many people are cheering that on, but I'm sitting here looking at the United States, $36 trillion in debt, and I'm going, is this really a good thing for Germany in the long run? I mean, I understand their need to pump up their defense spending because they're worried about Russia and all that, but there becomes a point where prioritization is more important than your...
And they're talking about infrastructure spending, which means putting the government in charge of infrastructure, and their government's much more efficient than ours in doing things, but it's still the government. And if infrastructure needs to be built, it should be built by private people, but they put so much bureaucracy and paperwork and red tape and all the rest of that, and then you add the EU's red tape on top of it and all the eco stuff and the labor unions and everything else. It's hard to start and run a business.
Yeah, Germany has deindustrialized.
Yeah.
They've essentially deindustrialized, and so now I don't know whether they're going to get the money to pay this back. I mean, where is Germany's next economic, growth going to come from if they have no industry? I mean, that's what Germany historically was, their engineering and their ability to build that stuff they engineer.
To manufacture high quality products that demanded a high price.
Yes.
And so a big part of it is the green movement there. I mean, they basically depend on if the sun's not shining or if the wind's not blowing, they have to shut factories down. And the factories are what produce the money that allow them to subsidize the solar and wind in the first place. So the Greens are still powerful in Europe, but they're half as powerful as they used to be because people are realizing that if it's not nonsense, it's this close to nonsense. And first thing you do is you have a strong economy, and then you take care of this stuff. You don't take care of this stuff and destroy your economy.
Yeah, there's one thing of wanting to learn to live cleaner, learn to be cleaner, and there's another thing to chop your legs off in the process. And essentially that's what European has done.
Yeah.
They've chopped their legs off.
They've had to go back burning coal because they cut down their very efficient and well-run nuclear power plants.
Yeah, which if you're actually an environmentalist, that just makes literally no sense to close down their power plants, which are relatively clean, and they're close to France, so they can go get those things renewed, recycled.
Recycled. Yeah. I think Germany does their own recycling. I could be wrong, but I know France and Japan and Russia do. We don't because of a stupid rule that Jimmy Carter wrote in '77.
Yeah, let's explain what this rule is. Is because during the recycling process, there is a point at which the material is essentially is weapons grade. Now it's not usable because it's in a process. You can't pull it out in it. But because it at some point in that process that material is weapons grade material, we can't recycle. That was the excuse. And which is stupid. It's one thing to say, hey, let's places like France or Iran or these people, you want to be careful about their recycling processes because you don't want allegedly you don't want rogue countries to have access to weapons grade material.
French have never had a
but we're not
problem.
going to. I mean, we can make weapons grade material with their regular factories. I don't understand how this is helping it at all, other than it's.
Well, the original idea was to the turn swords into plowshares, and they had the SALT agreements and everything, where they were reducing the number of nuclear weapons. And, the bottom line is that if we recycled and did nothing else but recycle nuclear waste, we could power all the nuclear power plants we have in the country for the next 100 years without bringing any new uranium or plutonium in. And if we turn many of those nuclear power plants into fast breeder reactors or third or fourth generation reactors, we would have power for the next 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna, if you're gonna be stupid, then you're gonna face stupid consequences.
And this is one of these things where France actually has it right. They have a lot of little power plants, and it creates a robustness in their grid that we simply don't have.
Yeah, their economy is hurt by regulation and by the fact that the EU's rules and regulations make it really hard to do anything, especially farming. But we never see it on the news here, but farmers there are in revolt, and pretty soon that's going to have an effect.
Yeah, they're revolt, and they're because of the carbon, because of all the various issues they have with carbon. They can't use their manure, can't use their fertilizer because of climate issues. All right, we are going to go off into space. Well, Richard Fields is going to take us off into space.
Is he still spacey then?
Yeah. Richards is off. I think he's off somewhere traveling the world again.
I think it's Florida, maybe.
Yeah, he's on his way.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what Richard has to say this week.
Mr. Fields. I saw him when I.
Hey, can we get sound on here?
When I took my car down to SoCal for my brother. I saw him.
Yeah.
Yeah, stayed at his place.
You guys go take a walk. You guys be hiking. And you guys used to go hiking.
All the time. Not really all the time, but a lot. We did a little 3-mile walk, yeah. But I didn't really have time to
Okay.
go on a long one. Okay, what? I can't get the sound in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm gonna have to edit the sound back into that one.
I read it.
Yeah. Well, see, at least we know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I forgot, but
Yeah.
okay.
He's talking about the fact that none of the major news media reported the. Well, you read it too, right?
Yeah, I was there when he said it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I forget. I know it's just that they didn't really talk about how Musk brought the
How his musketeers rescued them.
rescue.
That's what they should call them,
We've got people
musketeers.
we've got people on X trying to say we were never stranded.
Well, you've got people at NASA who say, no, they just changed the mission. They weren't stranded. Yeah. No, when you've got to stay 9 months more than you were supposed to, that's stranded. Yeah. What's their mission? To stay alive? Till we get them back? Make work? Play tic-tac-toe on your computer? Yeah, I'm a fanboy of Musk, like Richard. Yeah.
And thank you, Richard. That was interesting as always. I kind of get it, John. We live in such a divisive world today that there's groups of people, and pick a side, it doesn't matter. They simply cannot acknowledge when someone who is not on their side accomplishes something that is not bad. I'm not even going to say necessarily good, but this is an accomplishment. And for people to be claiming that, they were never stranded, that's kind of the biggest thing. Oh, first, they were never stranded. Yes, they were stranded. If you went somewhere for 8 days and you can't come home for 9 months, you're going to be stranded. If you go to a cabin in the woods and then you get snowed in you wanted to go there for a weekend and you're snowed in for a month, you were stranded for a month.
If you can't get out till spring, you're stranded.
You're stranded. And they weren't in a huge amount of danger because, the space station has plenty of food. They can get things up there. It's safe. They weren't in danger, but that doesn't mean they weren't stranded, and it doesn't mean they weren't rescued. And it's what the sad part is. I actually read an article a couple weeks ago that the reason they weren't rescued is because they didn't have the money.
And supposedly, Musk offered to rescue them much earlier, and Biden turned him down.
Yeah. The reasoning that the NASA gave was they didn't have the money. They didn't want to take the money from some future mission.
I'm sure Elon would have taken an IOU.
Yeah.
He would have.
Yeah.
Oh, why not? Taking
next
title
year.
to some of that extra
But here's the
federal
thing.
property that nobody's using.
You stranded 2 people in a space station. The cost of a rocket launch to go get them, should be budgeted in. An emergency rocket launch to rescue people should be budgeted in. And I just should. You shouldn't have to go, I don't have the money to launch an extra rocket to go pick them up. That should be factored in. There should always be that money should always be there for at least one rescue mission, right?
And see, since Elon and all the rest of them have proved that private enterprise can do the whole space thing way cheaper, way better, way faster, and way safer than governments, I'd say just get the governments out of the way. Yeah.
All right, John, let's plow through some of these.
Okay.
The fired FTC commissioner raised concern over Trump being tied to the tech bros, which I find hilarious. The only reason I'm covering this, John, is because of the absolute hypocrisy of us going through the last 4 years of all the techs, of all these same tech bros sitting there hammering people who are politically different than this lady.
Because the Dems put pressure on them to do it, threatening their very livelihood and their ownership of their business and their ability to do business. Is that if we'll stick the FTC on you, we'll start taking away your license to do all these things that make you all these billions of dollars. But that was okay.
Yeah.
That was okay. Yeah.
That kind of arm twisting is okay. And let's be honest. A lot of these tech bros that they're complaining about have given plenty of money to the Democrat Party.
Oh yeah,
what they're actually mad about is they stopped.
Yeah.
That's what they're really mad about.
And still, more of the tech bros are giving more. The tech bros are giving more money to the Dems than they are to the Republicans even now, and they did in the last election cycle. Out of all the billionaires, more of them gave money to Democrats than to, by far.
Yeah, well, it kind of makes sense because California is loaded with Democrats and they're loaded with tech bros, and so you get those two things common.
Yeah.
Who you have to work with. If you want to be able to do something in California, it's Democrats who are going to be in your way, so it's Democrats who you're going to have to pay off.
Yeah, you gotta cross their palm with silver.
And let's be clear: if this was a Republican thing, you're going to be paying off the Republicans, right? Not. This isn't. We're not just hammering Democrats to be hammering Democrats. This is a political system problem, not a Republican/Democrat problem. But the hypocrisy is. It's not a Democrat or Republican problem.
And the thing about the FTC is there's really no logic to what they do. They just decide that somebody's bad and go after them, and then nobody has any oversight over them, so they fine them and tell them they can't do this and they can't do that, and there is no rhyme or reason to it. None.
Other than it's an emotion. They don't like it, so
they don't like it. Like the thing with. Kroger and Safeway trying to combine. I heard lefties talking about it, saying, "Oh no, they were," and the reason they want to combine is so they can counteract Walmart, Costco, and Amazon, because they can't compete with their warehousing and their price points and all the rest of that. And everybody thought, oh yeah, that's their excuse. They need to do that to compete with them. No, they don't. And I'm thinking, you know nothing about business.
Yeah, well, which is because, well, it's going to hurt competition.
No, it's not.
It is the competition. That is the competition to the Amazons, to the Walmarts.
Yeah.
It.
And there are very few. I mean, like, can we mention? Yeah, like Nugget.
Yeah.
They compete. They compete very favorably on standard items, and they have, luxury items that other people don't have, and they have extraordinary service, and they're one of the top 100 companies in the country to work for. So there are ways to compete, but if you're a Kroger, or a Safeway, or those, you compete on price.
Yeah.
You compete on price, and you can't compete on price if you have, if you combine all these things, and you combine the warehousing and cut the overhead in your headquarters and all the rest of that, then you can compete. So they prevented that. It's just they pick favorites and they pick winners and losers.
Yeah, and we've been complaining about that since the beginning of the show, 30 years ago, whatever it was. Now that's been a common thread of complaint. All right, so there's this next story. We're talking healthcare, and there's two problems, right? The nurse practitioners and physician associates.
Physicians, right?
Assistants or associates.
No, assistants.
Assistants?
PAs. Physicians assistants.
They're increasingly providing the medical care. But at the same time, our emergency departments are overflowing. But the real problem
Two
here,
separate incidents.
they're two separate issues, but this problem is actually the same. Is doctors have, we just talked about monopolies, have monopolized the creation of doctors. It's very difficult to become a doctor, right? And it's very difficult to create new doctor schools. And it's very difficult to open a new hospital. The easiest way to solve the hospital boarding issue is to build more hospitals. But it's almost impossible to build hospitals because the hospitals in your region have to agree that they need a new hospital.
Restraint of trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the doctors, if you go to a medical school, they limit the people that go to medical school in the States. And I think we have, 1.2 physicians for every 1,000 people in the U.S. In most industrial countries is more like 2. So where do doctors make the most money? Oh, well, U.S., of course, because there's fewer of them.
Yeah.
And because they got this mighty union. But if you go to medical school anywhere else in the world and you come here, you basically have to almost go through medical school again. You have to pass your boards again, you have to residency again, and all the rest of that. Again, limit the number of doctors to keep their wages high.
Yeah, that's the whole point. All right, John, we've only got a few more minutes left, so we're going to move on. New York is congestion pricing plan. They've got their congestion pricing plan. Trump has kind of banned it, and for whatever reason thinks they can revisit and improve congestion pricing plan, which any congestion pricing, it's just getting poor people out of the way so rich people can move around the city freely. That's what congestion pricing is. Next story is California is looking to charge people how many miles you drive. For all you electric car drivers out there who have thought you've been getting away from paying your road taxes, no, they're coming for you. And the problem is they're going to come for everybody. Eventually it's going to come for those of us who drive, cars. We're going to pay both. For those of us who drive ICE cars, we're going to pay both. You can smell it coming.
Smell it coming. We're going to pay gas taxes because we drive a gas car, and we're going to pay miles because they get $6 billion a year in money they can hand out to their friends and support all these public employee retirement plans with. They're not going to give that up. And well, there's no way they're ever going to hit their goals for all electric cars in California anyway. We're going to be in the Maunder minimum here in about 3 years, and climate, it will be obvious to everyone that the Earth is cooling because it does that when sunspot activity drops. And so it's going to be a really hard sell when it's actually colder out than it was the year before and the year before and the year before, that we need to have people get in electric cars that they can't afford and they can't charge because we have no power plants. So it's going to be bicycles, man.
All right, John, 1 minute. There's been a ruling here at AI art created autonomously by AI cannot be copyrighted. It's a federal appeals court rules. But I think this is going to open up a conversation about copyright law. copyright law is so convoluted. It's part of it. It's a serious problem. And it's not just, one, if you create the prompt and the art creates, then you can copyright it. But apparently some guy had created an algorithm that created art on its own, and he tried to copyright it, and the judge says you can't. I'm not sure what the difference is. But that's... John, we got 30 seconds. You want to end that one? Or?
Well, I'm a writer, so, people, there are an awful lot of even libertarians that don't believe there should be copyright law. My question is, why is anybody going to bother to write anything if you can just record it and resell it?
All right, we're going to end with that. Thanks, John. Thank you, everybody, for working hard in there today. I know it's been rough. And thank you for watching. Have a good night, and please remember to love everybody.
Especially...